Metal Gear Solid 5. This was, by far, one of my most anticipated games of all time, as I had never played a Metal Gear game before. I got curious to see why people loved the MGS games, so I watched the gameplay for Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, and it blew me away. From seeing how graphically impressive it was, all the way to just how much freedom you had in the map it had you play in. I was in awe. I was absolutely sold seeing what the game had to offer in that vertical slice. So naturally, I had to purchase the previous entries, and I ended up getting the HD collection on my Xbox 360. I'm a huge stealth game fan. Being able to go into enemy territory, steal or get rid of anyone I was supposed to, and hop out without anyone knowing. It's a level of exhilaration that I don't get from most other genres. After all, if there are no survivors, is it a stealth mission? Couple that with the absolute insanity of the MGS storyline, and I went from fan to fanatic faster than Big Boss takes to shower. Sure, the older games will feel clunky by today's standards, but the part of the series that will last the test of time is the story. The timeline of the games is a bit out of whack. This is the order from beginning to end. Metal Gear Solid 3, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain, Metal Gear, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, Metal Gear Solid 1, Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, Metal Gear Solid 4, and finally, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. Numbers are definitely all over the place in this timeline, so while it can be a confusing way to look at it, I would say it's still preferred to go through the games in order of release. That way, you'll understand the story in the way it was originally told. This franchise's story was thought up by the legend Hideo Kojima himself, a man who might have every conspiracy theory ever in his head, and everything just works and makes sense. It's actually crazy, and I love this franchise. That said, Ground Zeroes was fantastic. The gameplay was incredible, the location looked immaculate, and the game ran a buttery smooth 60 frames per second on PS4 and Xbox One. The Phantom Pain was a one-up in pretty much everything. While Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain are technically two separate games, they both make up the whole that is Metal Gear Solid 5. Ground Zeroes is essentially part 1, while the Phantom Pain is part 2, as well as the biggest portion of the MGS 5 title. I'll go into more detail as to how these both are connected later. Hi there, I am MegaMadVlad, and I can safely say right now that Metal Gear Solid 5 is one of my favorite video games of all time. However, it does have its flaws. So let's take a deep dive into the game. I'll tell you why Metal Gear Solid 5 is a flawed masterpiece. First off, let's talk about Ground Zeroes. Ground Zeroes has you playing as the legendary soldier Naked Snake, otherwise known as Big Boss. The game is set not long after the end of Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, and is essentially the bridge between Peace Walker and the Phantom Pain. Snake is infiltrating Camp Omega on a rescue mission for two characters, Chico and Paz. He arrives just after a mysterious man, Skullface, exits the facility. So now the camp is left to the guards. It's up to you, the player, to sneak around and save both Chico and Paz. The game gives you an immense amount of freedom in how you go about achieving this story objective. With Metal Gear games being stealth action at their base, they tend to push you more towards those mechanics, working your way around enemies and obstacles in a smart way. Alternatively, you can go in guns blazing, mowing down all opposition, and still achieve your goal. And even those choices can be fine-tuned in different ways. You see, the Metal Gear franchise is typically linear in its approach to map design. You might have a big area sometimes to work in, but there's typically only one entrance and one exit from the zone. Metal Gear Solid 5, on the other hand, is open world, and it takes that open space and lets the player decide how to tackle different objectives. Do you sneak into an area via doorways? Do you hop into the back of a truck and have the driver take you into the area? It's up to you. Camp Omega is the playground, and the approach you take is your decision. Since this game came out during the PS4 and Xbox One generation, there's a big quality of life update that came in the area of the analog stick use. For instance, if you push the analog stick forward, you either walk or jog. In this era of console gaming, you have more area to move the stick before it goes to jogging. This gives you more control over the speed of your movement to reduce the sound the enemies will hear. This being a Metal Gear game, the classic alert sound is still there and I love it. You also have a reflex mode as well. If the enemy happens to notice you, time will slow down, giving you a chance to take out the one that noticed you before they can alert everyone else. If you wanted a more classic MGS experience, you could always turn the reflex mode off. CQC, or Close Quarters Combat, got a much needed upgrade, making it easier to work with from what it was in Metal Gear Solid 3. When I played Metal Gear Solid 3 years ago, I know that I had absolutely no idea how to properly work CQC whatsoever. Now, that could just be me being an idiot or something, I don't know. But what I do know is that CQC in Metal Gear Solid 5 is so much easier to use and understand this time around for me. Go ahead and interrogate someone.
Knock him out or kill him. His life is in your hands.
What has been updated?
Put the guards to sleep or kill them. Why not rescue some prisoners before Chico and get a different variant of the same cutscene?
No! Go away! Go away! Get off me! Get off!
Keep it down.
Go away! No! No! Go away! Go away!
Let me out of here, please.
Get off me! Get off!
Chico, keep it down.
Go away!
Take a second. Right over here. Hey, you gotta let me out. You let me out, Joe. Stay here.
Get off me! Get off!
The sheer freedom you get from this game is incredible, and you can really mess with the AI in this too. While the AI is actually really smart in this game, that doesn't mean you can't play around with them. It's all in how you play the system. As for the AI being smart, I mean in all the actions they can take at their disposal. I've played a lot of games in my life. I can't tell you how many times when you fire a sniper, the enemy either knows exactly where you are or your general location. In Metal Gear Solid 5, however, if you shoot a sniper, the enemy won't immediately know your exact GPS coordinates. Realistically, if you heard a sniper fire in the distance, you know how hard that would be to know the general direction it shot from just by hearing it? Sniper fire reactions aside, the guards know how to call on the radio to inform their CP, or command post, if something weird is going on that they notice. If they see you, depending on how close you are, they'll either know you're an enemy immediately or check the location they noticed you at by walking closer and shining a flashlight. They work together with the rest of the base in proper ways. Smart and adaptable AI. Once you finish that mission, you follow more of the story as it shows you what happens before the Phantom Pain can start. And let me tell you, it's very explodey. The main cast loses everything all at once. All in all, this first mission is huge in setting up the rest of Metal Gear Solid 5 as a whole. It's absolutely needed for the context of the 9-year coma-induced time skip. By the way, outside of the occasional transition, this game's cutscenes are mostly done in one camera shot, with the camera moving around like somebody's actually holding the camera. Transitioning from gameplay to cutscene back to gameplay is absolutely seamless. This style of camera work also continues into the Phantom Pain as well. Ground Zeroes also has more side missions you can play through. They're on the same map, but they have different objectives and scenarios going on in them. They're a great way to show off the different ways of playing through the games. These side ops are also there to show off the Fox engine by giving us Camp Omega at different times of day. Being able to see the camp in different lighting also helps bring into perspective just how Ground Zeroes is supposed to work. If it's dark out, enemies have a hard time seeing you, but that works both ways. Earlier in the day, it gives sunlight to the location, but also makes it much easier to spot you. Each mission starts you out with different equipment to use. After clearing certain objectives, you'll have access to more weapons just laying on the ground at the start. Silenced guns, tranquilizer rounds, bullets, sniper, rocket launcher, and so on. You have a ton of variety to choose from, and you get these just by playing the game. The various missions you can choose from are always in the mission select screen as well. If you finish one, it doesn't go away. This makes it so the entire game is always available to you in every form it offers. That's great for replayability and trying to do better each time, as well as finding all the various unlocks and hidden details. Kojima Productions really went above and beyond with this. Hideo Kojima is a very well-known video game director that has an extreme attention to detail in his games. From the cinematic storytelling to the easy-to-miss details, you can tell he puts his all into what he makes, and the game becomes that much better for it. Regardless, behind every great leader is a great team. None of this would be possible without the entire studio. Now that I've sung the game a ton of praises, what was the flaw in Ground Zeroes? It was just how short of a game it was. All you had to do to understand the canon story was the first mission you had access to. After that, all the side-op missions were there as fluff in comparison. While there was an incredible amount of replay value in it, it also cost $30 on launch. That's saying it has half of a AAA value to it. Quality-wise, absolutely. Lengthwise, not at all. You can beat this game in a single sitting. Outside of that, there's not really all that much that was wrong with it. There might be some people that can have a tough time with the difficulty, but that's down to the individual in question. Snake has less to work with in Ground Zeroes than he does in the Phantom Pain, so the options are a bit more limited. Now, as for how Ground Zeroes connects to the Phantom Pain, I already went over the coma part at the end of the mission in Ground Zeroes. What that cutscene does though is it opens up the player to learning the new changes in the game world alongside Snake after he wakes up. It's a great way to transition between two games while making the world building seem more natural than just exposition dumping with a character that already knows the context of the situation. So this is where we also transition over to talk about the main portion of Metal Gear Solid 5 itself, the Phantom Pain. And let me tell you, this game is phenomenal. Alright, so naturally, Snake wakes up in a hospital after being in a coma for 9 years. He has a lot of debris from the explosion still in him, and he's missing a portion of his left arm. Given all of these, he has a very relatable reaction by freaking out. It's all so sudden, 9 years gone just like that. Losing a vital piece of his body, wondering what having a metal shard stuck in his head will do, it's a lot. This is stuff to help him understand his situation after waking up finally. The scene is done in a great way to show off the mental state of the character we'll be playing as for the rest of the game. This section does pick up in both pace and intensity shortly. The doctor and nurse talk, and it's determined that they need to change Snake's looks via surgery so that he'll be able to live to see tomorrow. It's an emergency situation as the hospital is under attack, all to kill one man, Big Boss. This is when you create a character via the, well, character creator. You get to decide what surgery will make Snake look like. An assassin shows up, kills the nurse and doctor before the surgery can occur, so no surgery after all. Just before this assailant can kill Snake, she gets attacked by the patient from the next bed over. After a good tussle, she's set on fire and exits stage left. This man, Ishmael, has been watching over Snake for 9 years and has a goal of making sure he survives. This brings in the objective of escaping the hospital alive. This whole mission here is essentially the tutorial, so you learn how to do a vast majority of what it takes to play the game overall, from sneaking to firing a gun. It's done in a linear fashion as it's curated towards introducing new players to the game as well as setting the stage for the story to come. And boy, does it get outlandish in this hospital. Going from seeing unknown soldiers gunning down everyone to seeing a ghost boy and a man on fire who can't die to gunfire. It keeps one-upping itself the further you get. Intense scenes that show just how vulnerable and unprepared Snake is, to the more sci-fi aspects of the man on fire hunting down Snake. This mission is one hell of a wake-up call to someone who just woke up. Once Snake gets out of the hospital, it's not over yet. The man on fire is still hunting him down like a man on a mission from hell. And this is why you wear a seatbelt, kids. Ishmael is gone. You meet up with Revolver Ocelot, and he's still there hunting. Clearly, his mother taught him not to be a quitter. Overall, going from the mission in Ground Zeroes to this in the Phantom Pain, it's a hell of a transition and a very strong start to the game overall. 2 big missions, and a lot of cutscenes the franchise is known for, and gameplay that's incredible. The next mission is more akin to what Ground Zeroes gave you as its rescue mission in Afghanistan. This time, however, you have a much bigger area to work around with. The mission? Rescuing Kazuhira Miller, Snake's old partner in crime. You get more tutorials here showing you extremely useful things like using the binoculars, how to ride your horse, and information gathering.
Talk.
You also find out that Snake, in the last 9 years, has forgotten how to understand pretty much every language besides English. You can use something called a Fulton to essentially get more soldiers for your own personal army, but we'll talk about that feature later. Once you find Kaz, you need to sneak him out and have him brought back home via a helicopter. Hidden button prompt, go.
Save for old time's sake. Kept you waiting, huh?
This leads us to first meeting the group called the Skulls. They move incredibly strangely, like they're drunk, and in this footage, I actually snuck past them successfully. I'll go into more detail on who and what they are later on as well. Believe me, they do appear again.
I'm gonna rebuild it. Make a new place. Together. That we can call home. Diamond Dogs. Our new home.
After some more exposition, where does it go from here? This is actually where the flaws start to show. You go from a lot of confusion, mystery, and wondrous pacing to a more by-the-books type of mission structure with missions that don't have the same overarching feel of intensity to them. This would be considered a drop-off in the main story beats. What you have is still great, but the whiplash in tone can definitely be off-putting. The next mission involves objectives like stealing resources or even getting rid of no-name characters. It's absolutely much smaller in scope and a much more realistic style of mission rather than what players have come to know and love about the Metal Gear franchise. This point mostly boils down to the story of Metal Gear Solid 5 being much less in your face like the rest of the franchise. In previous Metal Gear games, they're not open world and have linear pathways to go through, sneak, and fight. Because of this, there were certain spots that would trigger cutscenes and other story beats. This would happen in a much faster and more reliable way than having an open world mission structure. When going through a hallway, you have a beginning and an end to the hallway. You can have multiple cutscenes placed inside that hallway and not have to worry about the player accidentally skipping past them and being confused for missing a major story plot. Open world gives players much more freedom to infiltrate locations. This makes it so that setting a cutscene to a specific location is much harder as the player might not stand anywhere near that particular point. While yes, Metal Gear Solid 5 does have its cutscene trigger points, it does a majority of them via specific actions like capturing someone or stealing resources. The focus on the mission structure is more on letting the gameplay speak for the game. Alright, so that's a more superficial look at the game's narrative from afar. If we look deeper into it, you can find some extremely good storytelling. You see, a typical story-based game will give you the story as you play through its main campaign, while giving you options to go out and get more added detail and context for certain things, sometimes via books and audio logs. It's a great way to keep the player interested in the overall story as they go from beginning to end of the game. It's structured that way to keep the interest there without veering too off course. You'll have your major story beats that raise tension, stakes, and high moments with an approach like this, obviously heavily dependent on the story of said game. Final Fantasy games are a fantastic example of this. There are a bunch of characters that you take on a journey. They meet up at the beginning, find a common enemy, and work their way to taking down the enemy by the end of the game. It's a tried and true format of storytelling since the beginning of time. Metal Gear Solid 5 works similarly and differently at the same time. If Metal Gear Solid 4 has a more story focus, what with its abundance of cutscenes, then Metal Gear Solid 5 has a more gameplay focus. That's not to say that Metal Gear Solid 5 doesn't have its story there and takes it seriously. It's more so that it's told differently. Because the game has a more gameplay focus this time around, the overall experience in play is better. A good portion of the story is told through cassette tapes that you can listen to while on your missions or in your chopper. The quality of the audio storytelling is fantastic, but again, it's different from the typical way a game tells its story. There are some fantastic story beats in this game, even a full mission that gave me so much immersion in how it went about telling it via the gameplay and story ratio. Turns out to be absolutely one of my favorite missions in any video game I've ever played. There's a reason for this. I'm about to go into some late game story spoilers right here. If you don't want to be spoiled, make sure to click the time you see here on the video. Alright, everyone clicked away? Good. Time for spoilers. Chapter 2, Episode 43, Shining Lights, Even in Death. This mission absolutely blew me away the first time I played the game. Even in the second playthrough years later, I'm still in love with what happened in it. In this mission, you find out something happened on Mother Base with the vocal cord parasites again. However, something is different this time around. Even after a cure was found for the parasite, it's occurring again, but we have no intel on it whatsoever. There's pretty much no communication with the quarantine platform, and the team that was sent there hasn't been seen since. Snake goes in to find out what's going on. They know it's something to do with the vocal cord parasites, but the uncertainty of what to expect has everyone on edge. Snake dons a gas mask to avoid any passing on of the parasite. A single radio signal went through and was very vague with no communication afterwards. This is where it all goes to hell. Walking in, Snake smells something sweet, notes it, and walks in. Flashing emergency lights are going off, as well as equipment and blood littering the floors. It's easy to see that chaos was going on in here. The atmosphere is a straight up hellscape. The goal of this mission is to find out what's happening and save everyone you can. The first hallway doesn't give you a very positive picture toward that second goal. Continuing on, you find people dead lying on the floor. Others that are still alive are hurt, confused, or going crazy. Alas, Snake must continue on to find the mystery man whose communication went through and see what they know. Going up many floors and seeing just how bad everything is, it's clear that the parasites are responsible. But as we finally find the man on the top floor, he's wearing some night vision goggles. Only one issue. He's dying right next to the doorway leading to outside. Here's what he says.
Boss,
What the hell happened?
at least you're okay.
What's going on?
I win. I'm no snail.
Damn it.
After saying his lines, the others over the comms piece everything together. All the infected are being controlled by the parasites and want to get outside. In doing so, they risk infecting the birds who would go on to infect the world. Using the night vision goggles, Snake can see who is infected and has the hard job of putting the infected down before things get out of hand. Snake is a leader that now has to end the lives of his own men that follow him into battle, all for the greater good. So every time Snake kills an infected person, your heroism will fall. You'll be notified that a staff member has died, and a permanent -1 for everyone dying in the group you've faulted so far. This is further put in by the fact that zooming in will have you mark the people as well as showing you their codenames. These codenames may have been nothing at first, but all of these going on for every kill in there really gets in your head. All this while Huey, another member of the main cast, is berating Snake for murdering his own men in cold blood.
You're insane, Snake! He was one of your men!
As you come across people, you see they're desperate for survival. Some are begging Snake to save them and panic when the boss they've been following is starting to kill them without saying anything. Some even shoot back.
Has died.
There's a room where there's a lot of men in it. Chaos was going on just before reaching the room, however, and once they see Snake, they all stop what they're doing, salute, and tell their boss their lives are in his hands. This is where you see that they're all infected. It's heart-wrenching knowing what you have to do.
Has died. Has died. Has died. Has died. Has died. Has died.
After clearing out the room, Snake finally finds someone who's not infected. He's from the rescue team sent in, but he's injured. Snake then picks him up and carries him to the exit. It's at the doors that he said he doesn't think he made it. You set him down, and you find out that the parasite got in through his injuries. You know what has to be done next.
Waiting down. All of them. Do it.
I'm sorry, boss.
Staff member has died.
This whole mission, from start to finish, is straight up phenomenal. My time in it both times had me absolutely glued to what was going on. The immersion and emotions I had were absolutely top tier. This is especially impressive considering it had the same effect on me the second time around, even when I knew what to expect. The story is all there, it's all fantastic and has a classic Metal Gear tone to it all. But since it wasn't in your face with all of its cutscene shenanigans, it's seen as a downgrade from what people expected out of a Metal Gear game. Having less cutscenes in a Metal Gear fashion is definitely seen as one of the major flaws this game has. But what else does this game have? And is it a flaw? So I went into detail about how Ground Zeroes elevated the Metal Gear gameplay to all new levels. What if I told you that the Phantom Pain takes that even further? Crazy, right? So the Phantom Pain has all the same gameplay elements that Ground Zeroes had and more. Since you run a private military operation, Diamond Dogs, you have to capture people with the Fulton system and place them into the department that works best with their skill levels. These skill levels range from E all the way to S++. You have departments like Combat, Intel, Research and Development, and more. So let's talk about what your R&D team gets you. With Research and Development, you can develop any number of items that you can use for any missions. You just need enough people and high enough skilled people in that field to develop the items in question. And let me tell you, there's a lot of things you can create. From a ton of pistols, shotguns, and rocket launchers, all the way to the Metal Gear staple of the cardboard box. Some of the stuff you can make gets absolutely absurd, such as a water pistol that can hold people up,
Hands up. Get down.
a warping Fulton, making yourself invisible, and even making Snake run much faster. The creativity of a lot of the items you can make is incredible and helps you out in a large variety of situations. You end up having so much control over how you want to go about infiltrating anything, simply from what you can make and how you use it all, letting you tailor builds from sneaking around to all-around murder frenzies. Your arsenal, coupled with the large open world, is your oyster. the enemy won't know what hit them. Since Snake has lost his left arm, he now has a bionic arm that he can use as another secondary weapon of sorts. With it, you can make a noise to call some guards over to your location, make a rocket arm, a stun arm, and so on. These can even level up further. For example, the stun arm does exactly what its name implies. There are 3 levels to it. The first 2 stun the enemy when you're next to them, the second being stronger than the first. The 3rd level is where things get absurd. As long as you're within 40 meters of a target, your 3rd charge can summon lightning from the sky to hit all in a 40-meter radius from Snake. Yeah, it definitely gets out there. The bionic arm is less of a hindrance and more of an asset. Having added gameplay features tied to it give the player even more options to play how they want. Alright, so let me ask you a question. When you think of bionic arms, what's the first thing that comes to mind? That's right, the AI. Best segue ever. The AI are still smart in the way that they work together with each other to hunt you down and inform others. If you turn off the power to a base of theirs, they'll go check it out and see what the reason is. If you're spotted, they can talk to their CP or command post, who can then talk to the whole region they cover, in which case, not only will that single base go on alert, but all the surrounding bases and guard posts will too. Naturally, even though they're smart, that doesn't mean you can't have fun with them. Also, in Ground Zeroes, they had the various missions changing the time of day, but they never changed while on the mission. The main mission itself was set at night, which by itself is the perfect opener for people getting a chance to try out the game for the first time. Night makes it much easier to not be spotted, but the player also needs to try and spot where the enemies are at as well. Not to mention, stealth is usually associated with night. During the missions in the afternoon or morning, there's more light around, so enemies have a much easier time seeing you from further away. It brings in a bit of a different challenge overall to the player, as there's more situations where they can be spotted. Another thing that the Phantom Pain makes better to that system of time of day is simply by making it ever-changing. In essence, you can start sneaking around at night, and while you're still in the base, it can turn to daytime. There is a night and day cycle in this game. Because of the ever-changing time, nothing is static, so the challenges are ever-changing as well. Some enemies will even go to sleep when it turns to nighttime. Others will head over and start using the searchlights to spot for enemies on the prowl. So not only will the lighting change with the time of day, but also some of the patrol routes and activities the guards will be doing. Did I mention there's wildlife in this game too? Like the passive sheep and birds, to bears and others that will attack you. It's a bit more variety to the game overall, and another thing to watch out for besides just patrolling guards. Taking advantage of the guards' AI is so much fun in this game. You can find various situations that will make you laugh, such as fultoning a truck while the guards are in it.
You captured an enemy vehicle.
So, out of all the games I played up to 2015, there is a gameplay feature in both Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain that I never experienced before this. Regardless of if this existed beforehand, it's my first time experiencing it, and I've seen it in games since then as well. That feature is the ability to toggle where your character is on the screen between the left and the right side. It helps so well with being able to look around corners. It's so useful that I'm glad it got picked up by other games. So, earlier, I brought up an enemy type called the Skulls. They are your not-so-average enemy that is actually a tough time to fight against. They move really fast, have a high amount of health, there's always multiple of them, and they have both swords and guns to use against you. While in some missions you can sneak around them, if you get spotted, you better be ready for one hell of a fight. It's nothing the Snake can't handle with CQC, but you're a soldier up against superhumans. This is a 100% very Metal Gear type of enemy. Something else that goes against the Metal Gear grain would be the buddy system. This is a system that allows you to go in with a helper. There are only 4 of them, and they bring different things to the table. You start off with D-Horse, who is, well, a horse, used to help Snake travel faster around the maps. Then you have D-Dog, or DD for short. They'll help locate certain animals, resources, and enemies by scent within a certain range. Next up is D-Walker. It's a bipedal robot that Snake can control with a big arsenal of weapons to work with. Finally is Quiet, a mute female superhuman sniper that hums a tune when locked onto an enemy. Nothing else to note about her. Definitely nothing. Nothing at all. So, even with all 4 of these buddies, you can still upgrade their equipment. D-Dog can have equipment to kill, stun, and even Fulton people on your behalf. Quiet can get more damaging snipers, trank snipers, and she can wear, D-Walker has the most customization at its disposal, what with being a robot and all. A lot of weapons, allow it to spot enemies for you, allow it to move on its own, different arms, a couple different pistols, change the paint scheme, and so on. While all of them bring different things to the table, they never end up getting in the way. Unless Quiet's humming starts to get on your nerves for the 1000th time. The gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 5 is god tier, and dare I say it, genre defining. If there was a DLC for this game, I would expect it to be just as good or even raising the bar considerably. Alas, this brings us to another flaw. The game is unfinished. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, for all intents and purposes, is unfinished. Let's go over the context first though. Before the game was released, it was a well-known thing that Konami and Hideo Kojima had something happen that put a rift between them. It got to the point where news articles from all over were talking about what happened and trying to get more details whenever they could find something on it. From stuff like Kojima himself being locked in a room and having to work with a person that would go from that room to the rest of the team for him to direct messages accordingly, to even the fact that Kojima Productions was switched from an in-house studio of Konami's to a contract employment. This is basically a nightmare production for the game. Every obstacle you can think of was likely put in place to really sever Kojima Productions from Konami. They even took Kojima Productions' logo off the game cover right after this split happened. It's not a creative situation I would wish on anyone. That said, because of those various situations, Chapter 2 isn't as full as Chapter 1 was, and Chapter 3 never saw the light of day, save for a single unfinished cutscene. In Chapter 1, every main mission was needed to progress the story. They were all unique from each other, but they at least pushed the story forward a bit every time. There were 31 in total to finish up Chapter 1's theme of revenge. In Chapter 2, however, it was much more spread out for any missions that furthered the story. Not every mission was needed, as a lot of them were missions from Chapter 1, but set to a higher difficulty. While Chapter 2 ends at Mission 50, that's only room for 19 missions as opposed to Chapter 1's 31 missions. Then you take that 19 and cut it down by a lot, and then you have Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called Race. While the revenge theme in Chapter 1 is very prominent and fleshed out, Chapter 2 doesn't really give me an overall feeling of race. It feels more like an afterthought endgame storyline. Yes, it has my favorite mission of all time in it, but the only themes of race I gather from it are about the various different languages in the world. Even with that, it's so small and they had to wrap up quite a bit of other side stories to top that off. Chapter 3's theme of peace obviously doesn't show up in the fact that it was never finished or released. The unfinished cutscene that some lucky digital deluxe collectors who's-a-what's-its got access to seeing were posted on YouTube for all to see. A large portion of it was finished outside of the facial animations, and some other very visible details. I'm gonna have the link in the description below for all who want to see it. So yes, the game is unfinished. It's not unfinished in a way that makes it unplayable. It's more in a way that makes it less satisfying for the story. Add on the fact that this is Kojima Productions' first open world game where they had the visual story much more loose and you start to see the cracks and flaws. It's not perfect, no. But I would go on to argue that it's still a damn fun game with some of the best and most immersive stories I've come across in recent years. Not to mention hamburgers.
So, what do you think of our signs now? And it doesn't just taste great. You won't believe how cheap it is to make. And because it's pumped up with preservatives, it won't spoil easily in regions lacking refrigerated storage or transportation infrastructure. This bad boy could even solve Africa's hunger problem. Excuse me. People will no longer fight over food or find reason to hate one another. Mankind will come together, reunited between these fluffy buns. Forget Pax Americana. Say hello to Pax Hamburgana. Pax Hamburgana.
Alright, so while Metal Gear Solid 5 came out in 2015, it didn't win Game of the Year at the Game Awards. After all, it was up against The Witcher 3. Regardless, it didn't come out of that with nothing. In fact, Metal Gear Solid 5 won Best Music that year. So this is a point that I wanted to bring up about the music. Considering it won that award, I do wonder how. You see, normally when I'm playing video games, I'll be in combat during some big boss fight or something, and the music will be incredible. The only thing is, because I'm focused on the game, I don't actually tend to notice the music playing. Now, this isn't all the time, mind you, as I do notice really epic themes and stuff that stand out. An example of a song that stands out is one of the big themes of Metal Gear Solid 5, Sins of the Father, sung by Donna Burke. That's a song that anyone would notice just by how grandiose it is in scope and sound, not to mention the singing. Most of the time though, you don't have a song like that. The gameplay is more in focus here for the player to enjoy. Naturally, from the typical music that plays, it's more subtle. Something to help drive the emotions and gameplay forward on a moment-by-moment basis, like when you get noticed by an enemy. But here's another example in my field of not noticing the music. The music isn't always used in every moment of gameplay. It's there to help during certain moments, battles, cutscenes, and so on. Considering how often I either don't notice it, or it's not there, I was wondering just how it won Best Music. So naturally, I took a listen to the soundtrack. To my surprise, was some incredible music that fit the game. But was it ever in the game to begin with? I couldn't tell you. No matter how it won, it won. Fantastic music, just wish I personally could notice it more. The world in this game is gorgeous. This is a game that came out in 2015, and it still absolutely holds up to today. You have access to 3 different maps: Mother Base, Afghanistan, and Central Africa. Mother Base is ever expanding. It starts out very small, but as you raise your base development, it expands to many more different platforms. Being set in the ocean, it has this almost oil rig facility look to it. Afghanistan is a much more desert-looking environment. The rocks look incredible as they took photogrammetry for the more authentic look. It's very spacious, and you have many different vantage points to look at your enemies and gather intel with. Not to mention, many different points of entry into various bases. Central Africa is in more of a jungle-type setting. You have some dense forests, but you also have some very open locations as well. It's much more green in overall look compared to Afghanistan. Both Afghanistan and Africa have different groups of enemies. Because of this, they also have different languages they speak that the player will hear.
Ты слышал, о чем говорила женщина рядом электростанции?
Нет, что за женщина?
Мы не знаем, что с ней. Но говорят, что она голая.
Dis nie sleg nie, maar ook al die terrein, jy kan net inklim.
Ja, maar om die ding te ry.
It adds to the game in making both locations even more diverse from each other overall. There is a flaw that people do see the Phantom Pain in its maps. Because of the openness, there's quite a few times that you'll be going from one point to the other without seeing any type of life. No enemies, no wildlife, nothing. In an open world setting, this has the potential of being seen as not being fleshed out enough to be a living, breathing world. I would lean toward the opposite. Being so open and having time to yourself without having enemies at your back all the time is quite beneficial to the game. If everywhere you walked had enemies, sneaking around would be nearly impossible. Let's not forget that in this game, everyone is an enemy. This isn't a fantasy RPG like The Elder Scrolls, where you can go anywhere and talk with people. This is you infiltrating an entire map, where you're the enemy to literally everyone. So because of that point alone, having time where you don't see enemies for a while is a great time for a breather. That's not to say that the map is empty either. There's plenty of bases spread throughout the maps in their entirety, all giving their own unique challenges and hiding places. Alright, so when I played this game over 7 years ago, God, I'm getting old. It blew me away with its world, story, and gameplay. It was absolutely my game of the year from all the ones I actually played that year. When I played it again for this video, I was still absolutely sucked back into the game. I did not want to put it down. Even though this is the second time I picked it up, and I knew what was going to happen in the story and gameplay, it astounds me that it was able to grip me like it did when I played it the first time as well. Sure, it has its flaws in it, but what game doesn't have flaws? There are no perfect games in the world. Nothing is perfect in any way. All games have their own flaws, and that also adds to their overall experience. If we had perfect games, no games would ever come out after them in their respective genres. That aside, I absolutely recommend this masterpiece to anyone that has a liking in the stealth action genre. I said before that I would call it genre defining, and I meant it absolutely. Metal Gear Solid 5 might not be perfect, but is perfect for me. My only dislike of it is that we didn't have any DLC or expansions to it, adding more to an otherwise fantastic game. I hope this helped to explain why Metal Gear Solid 5 is a flawed masterpiece.